Hi everyone, and welcome to yet another workshop during our Risk Awareness Week. Now, first of all, before I introduce our speaker, I really wanted to encourage everyone to keep this interactive, make the best use of this, ask questions, don't just talk to us, talk to other participants as well. Have conversations in the comments, in the comments below. Use this opportunity to share ideas, share what you do, how you use this information, and what worked or what didn't work in your company. I mean, we have a truly global audience, so it would be amazing if you shared different stories from different parts of the world. And now for this workshop, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Brian Putt. Brian has retired from Chevron in 2016. He is an expert in decision making, in risk analysis, and now he is consulting in decision quality. So all his details, again, are underneath this video. I'm sure the information that Brian will provide will be enormous value, and I encourage everyone to continue that conversation after that session with Brian. Brian, it's over to you. Welcome.
Hey, thank you, Alex, very much. Thank you. So we want to talk about decision analysis, and we're going to be talking about framing the decision. This is probably the first of kind of really 3 videos, and this video will be more about the framing side of it, and then we will expand on this and actually go into an analysis using a case study about an oil project, and then the third one will be more about value information. And so, if you're interested in this series of videos, please sign up for the other 2 as well.
Yeah, this is actually a very important point. So we've broken up the whole message into a number of sessions, so make sure you join the whole series of sessions to get the kind of the full value of that information for decision making.
Very good. Okay, so first of all, what is decision analysis? Because it's not a term that rolls off of everyone's tongue all the time. And what it is really a systematic approach to decision making. And it's using some proven techniques. I mean, decision analysis has been around since the 1980s. And unfortunately, it hasn't made as much inroads to companies as it probably should. And I have a really good understanding of why that is.
And by all means, later in the conversation, share those reasons, because we need to know what are some of the pitfalls.
Okay, well, I think the biggest pitfall is executives got to their position by having good outcomes in their decision making. And when they get up to these levels, and it may not be the C class, but the project manager or the decision executive, he says, wait a minute, why do I need this new process? I've made these kinds of decisions all along. I know how to make these decisions. I don't need all this other stuff. Besides, you may come up with a different answer, but now I've got to defend my answer of the decision I want to make. So this is something, and recognizing it, I worked at Chevron for a number of years and started doing this in actually 1992. Okay, we were able to get a hold of some very smart middle-level managers, and we trained them in decision analysis, and they became the advocates for it, and they grew up. And there's a wonderful video by George Kirkland that was done in 2010 for Informs that talks about it. At that time, he is one of these people we talked to in the 1990s, and by that time, in 2010, he was now vice chairman of the company. And so he was a big advocate. And one of the key phrases in that video by George is that decision analysis is part of Chevron's DNA. And we actually had, you couldn't get a project approved. You couldn't get an appropriation request approved without having a decision analysis done on it, and it's showing the uncertainty related to the different alternatives, and basically following the spider diagram, which is shown over here on the right. So it is a structured communication process, and it promotes alignment and understanding and clarity of actions. And particularly in the oil industry, and I'm sure this is true in other processes, in other businesses, you're not in it by yourself. There are multiple partners, And oftentimes these big decisions require alignment of all three parties in order to go ahead with the project. They don't have to agree on everything. They just have to agree on going forward. They may have different reasons for going forward, but that's okay. And so it's also a methodology for improving decision quality. We're going to talk about what is decision quality, because decision quality is not the outcome of what you did, but really the decision that you make at the time. And it's not a mechanical process to validate predetermined decisions. One of the issues we had at Chevron was that once we instituted this process where you had to have a decision analysis, the decision maker would come to me and say, hey, we're going to go for an appropriation request here in a month. Hey, could you do a decision analysis for us so we have that to incorporate? And we say, well, wait a minute. This process is supposed to help you make the decision, not to just validate the decision that you have already made.
Yeah.
Remember, this is that the decision executive, I know what the right answer is. Now do the decision analysis to prove that I got the right answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
It's a little bit of survivorship bias with arrogance mixed in the cocktail.
Yeah, I mean, they would not characterize it as arrogance, though. They just say, look, I know how to do it. I've done it well. And that's why it's interesting that Chevron over the years made a decision early on, back in the 90s, that we were going to share this process with our partners.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason being is that we needed to get alignment. That's the biggest problem. In fact, in the oil industry, getting alignment with partners is probably the biggest hurdle in getting a project approved. And even then, the partners would come back and say, well, Chevron, we understand that that's the way you do it, but that's not the way we make decisions. And so, you can lead the horse to water, but you can't make him drink.
Mm-hmm.
Because decision analysis, you might think about it this way, this is an old-time expression, what you're trying to do is not split up the pie. You want to make the pie bigger, right? If I make the pie bigger, everyone's better off. It's a win-win situation then. Yeah.
That's a very well put analogy.
Okay. And so we all make decisions. In fact, I spoke to some high school students from literally around the world yesterday, and we talked about the personal decisions they have to make about going to college and where to start work and houses and all kinds of things. So what we're talking about today is not just applicable to your business, but it's also applicable to your personal life.
Yeah, and this is probably the biggest point that I want people to take away. I mean, the decision science, the risk analysis, it's not for big corporations to do on big projects. It's the process that improves the quality of decision-making, any kind of decision-making. I mean, I had run scenarios and simulations on my wedding budget once.
Well, one of the examples I used with the high school students was an analysis to replace my roof on my house. And to your point about the big companies and big projects, that was an issue that we had to get over at Chevron initially, because the first decision analysis projects we did were big. They were long and complex, 3-4 months, And so management kind of saw this as, gee, this is a lot of time, resources applied, and am I really getting value out of this long-term process? And eventually, people became more educated. The decision review board meetings, which you use to get approval or to check in to make sure you're working on the right project, they got much more efficient because they knew that the decision makers and the DRB understood what decision analysis was all about.
Mm-hmm.
So once again, Chevron started this process in 1992. I left in 2016, and the decision analysis is just as strong since I left and since George left in 2015. So, and by the way, the executives that are up on top of Chevron now have all gone through decision analysis as well, so they're well aware of it. So,
yeah. So I guess at this point, and I know we keep kind of interrupting the flow of the presentation, but I'm sure we'll get to it. But just the two key takeaways so far is that both the decision analysis and risk management, it's really a long game. It's not going to change overnight. It requires a significant mental shift for the people. And the second point is that it's not natural for humans to just become amazing at risk analysis or decision analysis. So you have to teach them. So, and that's what we do.
Yeah, and I'll tell you the thing that has to happen that kind of is a spark. Normally there's one event that kind of changes the mindset of the company or changes the mindset of some important people, and that is when you can do a decision analysis on some project which is really uncertain. So the decision maker doesn't really know what he wants to do, and you conduct the study, you come back, and there's now clarity in the decision for him. And he says, okay, this is really a good process. And so that first project you pick, be careful, make sure it's the right, get the right characteristics so you can be successful.
So you can, I mean, that's a very good point. I mean, you really want to, when you do the pilot, because essentially that's what we're suggesting people do, is you try with something, you select 1, 3, 2, 3 projects to kind of to give it a flavor to the executives on how it works. You really wanted to select the pilots that are meaningful and where uncertainty is high, so you know for a fact that proper decision analysis and proper risk analysis will actually show a completely different solution, something which was not obvious, something that will be like aha, and nobody can say, oh, we knew it all along, why did we waste a week or a few hours or a month of our time?
Right, absolutely, that's absolutely. So let's coming back to this slide here, why we use decision analysis. Oftentimes these decisions are one of a kind. They're not a manufacturing type thing. In the oil industry, obviously the offshore developments tend to be thought of as one of a kind, although there are basic characteristics. They can also be complex. And so certainly oil projects are that way. You might think of types, how to build a car, okay? Because there's been I read some articles recently about types of cars and going to a hybrid, staying with a gasoline car, a hybrid car, or an all-electric car. And maybe I'm jumping ahead here, but down here, if you're GM, I think GM just announced they're going to go to all-electric cars. And well, it's this way today because we got mostly hybrids around. But they're saying, no, it's all going to be electric, where Toyota has said, no, we're going to stick with our Prius and go with the hybrids, okay? And so that's all, recognizing it's dynamic, we need to understand and have a position here on what's going to happen or the probability is going to happen and what are going to be the economics of it, recognizing the complexity of building an all-electric car and where are you going to get the lithium batteries, as an example. Mm-hmm. Another good example recently, at least in the U.S., is, and it could be applied to Europe as well, is Amazon trying to put in an office building in New York City, and New York says we don't want you, and they have to evaluate, well, okay, can I downsize? If I'm talking about Europe, where does Amazon put their distribution centers? How is Brexit going to impact where they might put their distribution centers? And so all this relates to the uncertainty that needs to be considered when making the decision. And if you just arbitrarily says, okay, Brexit is going to go one way or the other, you really may miss some value because you haven't made the wrong decision.
Yeah. And there's an interesting study I read on the plane recently. It is a group of scientists, and I'm sorry I can't remember what their names were, but the group of scientists have tested, I think, about 130 different executive decisions. And they found that 70% of the time, the decisions are binary, which basically means it's either do this way or do nothing. And of course, that's, life is not that simple. That's basically leaving a lot of value on the table. And choosing between option A or doing nothing is really not a quality decision making. There's a better way.
Well, let me build on that, Alex. On my next slide here, on the bottom right, I've got this little decision tree, and to your point, binary would be I just have these two branches and everything else is uncertainty. But in this little decision tree, you can see if I take this route, this top route, there's some uncertainty. Even think about that as Brexit, okay? Brexit. And then depending upon the outcome of Brexit, I can make different decisions. So that's the dynamic aspect that you're referring to, called sequential decisions here. This could also be considered the value of information, which will be the subject of the third video that I do. And the Brexit outcome would be perfect information, whereas if you try to make an assessment now through some testing, talking to politicians or whatever, would be imperfect information. So there is this logical framework that you go through a process, and you can revert back here to more framing. Because oftentimes what happens is you find hybrid solutions. You learn what's good and what's bad, and you say, oh, now I know what to do. And so you come back there and you kind of recycle it a little bit. We are going to use quantitative models, and these models can be of various types. Most are Excel, but there are other types of programs that are used, particularly in the shale side of it. There's more of a manufacturing process, but there's still a lot of decisions. You know, do I continue? Do I continue doing 10,000-foot horizontals? Where should the next one be? How much is this additional property worth? Because now I can extend the horizontals. And so there are some other models specifically designed for shale projects that get used. But most of the work, all of the work I have done has been with Excel and with either decision tree software or with SIPMath, which is kind of a Monte Carlo thing that we'll be utilizing in session 2 and 3. So the way to express uncertainty is through probabilities. I don't have a slide here on this, but you know, people said, "Hey, well, it's likely going to rain, or it's likely I'm going to go on this trip, or whatever." Well, ask 10 people, and what does likely mean? What's the probability of likely? And likely could be 90%, or likely could be something more than 50%. So it's not really helpful to use words. You really need to express these uncertainties in terms of probability. And once you've done that, now I can actually do some analysis using this decision tree framework. And even when you use Monte Carlo or some sort of that, you still need to separate things into decisions, these squares, and the uncertainties represented by the circles.
Yeah. And so just to all the listeners out there, and I encourage you to comment and say which of these are you using, what do you think about this approach, but the general theme for the whole week of risk awareness is that actually in decision science, for years, we had solutions how to use risk analysis, not once a quarter, not once a year, but actually before making an important decision, because as experience shows us, it tells us that doing risk analysis before making a decision is actually much more powerful, useful, and less expensive than doing risk analysis after the decision's all been done and we have to deal with the consequences.
That's very interesting, Alex, because that's exactly the way Chevron looked at it. They had a display that talked about where was the most value added, and it was really in this first phase when you're considering alternatives, because once you've picked an alternative, you've kind of narrowed the range of outcomes that can happen, okay? And in the oil industry, you know, if I pick a tieback, that's one kind of a project that could be limiting on the capacity, right? Because there's only so much capacity on that tieback because there's other things coming back into it. On the other hand, if I do the big project, now if the resource isn't there, I've got all this money sunk, and in the economics of the project are not very good. So it's really important to get it right at first. And another interesting point here, when Chevron first started doing this, we thought it was only good in this alternative generation and evaluation process. And then we learned, oh, no, it was all good in feed as well, front-end engineering, because there's some decisions there. And then we found out, oh, okay, no, we need it in the operations phase, because obviously there's additional a decision to be made about debottlenecking the project, expanding the project, and things of that nature. So actually what happens is the decision analysis started at the very beginning and goes through to the end of the project. It's really amazing how Chevron has adopted that and found value throughout the process.
And I really want our listeners to appreciate, because I mean, Chevron has been doing this for decades. And what this basically means, it's empirical testing. So if somebody took the effort to empirically test whether something works or doesn't work, so it seems to work. But more importantly, because I mean, this is the feedback I hear all the time, doing risk analysis before strategic decisions is important. I mean, some people literally say that what I'm talking about when I talk about risk management to being integrated into the decision making, they literally say, oh, this only applies to strategic decisions, that happen once a year or twice, every 5 years. Then of course not. Everything we will talk about today, and I want everyone who is listening to us right now appreciate that, and write your comments if you agree, disagree. I encourage you to communicate and share. The methodology, the logic, the tools are applicable to your life decisions, to operational day-to-day decisions, to investment decisions, to strategic decisions. It absolutely doesn't matter. The level of detail may be a little bit different, but other than that, it's about making decisions that are uncertain, higher quality. That's really essential.
Well, you're absolutely right. I'm going to skip a slide and we can come back to that. But this is what we're talking about. It's scalable. You've got this great big toolbox that you can spend 3 months trying to decide something here, or it could be I have to make a decision, and you got 2 or 3 people in an office with a whiteboard, and you spend an hour laying out the frame of it. And you may find from just the frame and the strategy table, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit, oh, there's an obvious solution. But you need to brainstorm this and get a lot of different ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So why should we use decision analysis? Well, it brings clarity by defining the problem. What is assumed, excluded, included? It's really important to be working on the right project, because, I don't know, maybe you've had some experiences where the boss says, hey, I want you to go study this thing, and you go off for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, and you study, you come back and say, okay, boss, here's the answer. And he says, hey, that's not the problem. I really want you to work on this. And so what you really want to do is to define the problem, get a decision hierarchy, say these are the focus on decisions. We'll talk about that in a minute, a little bit more in a minute, and get their approval before you start going off and collecting a lot of data and doing a lot of analysis. So during the process, we're going to identify the critical factors, and we can do that with the deterministic sensitivity tornado diagram, or a probabilistic one as well. There's 2 different types. And also sensitivity to probability, so we can find out how important that particular assessment of uncertainty is. And we'll incorporate them into some sort of decision tree, and then we'll evaluate the results using cumulative distribution functions. These are sometimes I call them S-curves, but they easily allow us to compare different alternatives. And so I think this is the way that decision analysis should be used. What are the attributes of a good decision? I alluded to this a little bit earlier. Think about a good decision that you made or observe being made, okay? What is it about the decision that makes you believe it was a good decision? And then brainstorm the list of attributes of that good decision. What are your answers to these? Well, first of all, you need to understand your value measures. So it has to support your goals. If your goals was to reduce risk, that's fine. Your objective was to have a good rate of return or NPV, that's good. If it was to change the earnings of your company, that's fine. But it needs to support the goals of whatever you might have. The decision also should be based on good current information, and I emphasize the current information. Now, the last one here, it worked out well. Well, I don't know about that one. Let's talk about that one a little bit more, okay? When risk and uncertainty are present, making a good decision does not guarantee a good outcome will result. So over here, if you get the good outcome, it doesn't mean that you made a good decision. Really important distinction here, and one that's sometimes difficult for the decision makers to understand. Okay?
I am amazed at just how difficult it is for the decision makers to grasp that supposedly simple message is that good outcome may just be luck, just like bad outcome may be unlucky, but the decision was good. And you know when it hits home, because I do a lot of corporate training for the executives and the directors and the managers, and one thing that hits home is that if they don't make an effort to document the decision-making process and hence prove that it was a quality decision, they will always be judged by the outcome. And the outcome is a gamble. It could be lucky, it could be unlucky. I mean, they will be judged, their bonuses will be paid, their careers will be based basically on luck, which is not something many people are comfortable with. So they're going, okay, maybe it's worth paying a little bit more attention. So to everyone who is listening to us, I mean, this is this slide is just groundbreaking stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think that's why I think, and this is kind of a higher level decision, but the question is, how do businesses reward their executives or reward their employees? And oftentimes they're giving long-term stock options, which says, okay, you're getting a stock option now, but you have 5 to 10 years to exercise that. So the value of that stock option is, what happens in the future. It wasn't, whether you had a good outcome today. So I think it really encourages companies or employees to try to make the good decisions for the long term and not to simply meet short-term goals for that year, for example. And if I could talk to Chevron, and this has been in the news as well, about the shale production, and Jay Johnson, who's the president of the upstream and the corporate VP, he said, look, we're not trying to maximize our production. We're trying to do this for the long term to maximize the total resource produced, not the current production. So they're taking a long-term view of how to develop the shale projects in the Permian. So, yeah. And so the point you made here, Alex, is exactly right. You need to have a large sampling decisions and do this on a lot of things, because in the long run, the number of good decisions will generate good outcomes overall. Okay. So the decision quality spider diagram has been around for a long time and can help a team understand and recognize where they have some failure modes. So we talked about the well, one of the things that's really happening right now is data science, okay? And to me, I'm not a data scientist. I'm a decision analyst, decision quality consultant. But I went to an Informs project conference one time, and this gentleman gave a presentation as a data science and so forth. And he did all this analysis and showed all these graphs. And at the end, I said, well, what decision were you trying to make? And he says, oh, I didn't have a decision to make. I was just trying to analyze and see what insights I could gather. Well, the problem is he spent all this time working on analyzing data. He did a lot of stuff out here. So this is 100%. He analyzed this to death, man. But he failed to understand what are the alternatives he's trying to consider, or the frame, or what's the logical reasoning, or any of these others. So this is the paralysis by analysis. You're trying to get all of these 6 spokes out to the outside edge, or the best you can. And then the other is making a gut decision. So the decision maker is committed to action, but the project team may not be aligned with that. There was no alternatives considered. So it's really important to try to bring on the spider diagram all of these elements out to, you know, a reasonable level. And maybe I'll talk about this again at the end, but the project team can use this throughout the analysis, okay, to check, are we doing all right? You just kind of have a, you know, a quick check. Everyone just tell me what percent do you think on each of these 6, and you average them and you find out where the team feels that they're weakest. And then the final point would be this: it's a conversation to bring about clarity of action.
Mm-hmm.
You need to have a conversation. You need to have and it has to be an open conversation where people feel free to speak their minds. You know, it's not a Me Too type conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So the first phase of this structured process is really one of framing, which is what we're focusing on here. And the way I like to do it, there's other steps that you could follow in here, but basically one of brainstorming, issue raising, and there's all kinds of ways of doing that. But basically you're trying to identify, you know, what are the decisions that you're trying to make here, or what decisions need to be made, what are the uncertainties that need to be considered, and then what are your value measures, these purple things, because those value measures are really important. That's one of the spokes on that spider diagram. And then we'll take the decisions and put them into a decision hierarchy. That'll generate a strategy table. We can do a force field diagram for and against, you know, a particular alternative, and we bring all of these things together in this influence diagram.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah, and just to summarize the previous point, I mean, for the people who are familiar with decision science and decision quality in general, I mean, this is pretty common thing. But for anybody who wants to make better decisions and wants to integrate risk analysis into decision making, that may look a little bit overwhelming. But the reality is it's very simplistic. I mean, you need to identify all the different inputs, the important things to consider in the decisions. You need to prioritize all those important things to make sure you focus on the right things. And then you identify the alternatives. And then you try and use graphical diagrams to link it all together, because that helps us switch from system 1 to system 2 thinking. The problem with the whole framing exercise is that people think they see the alternatives, but the reality is they probably miss a lot of important alternatives. They miss a lot of important inputs. And that's why we use different graphical representations to help us see more clearly. But we'll unpack all of this a little bit later.
So let's consider this greenfield development. And let me say that this greenfield development is what we're going to utilize in the second and third videos that we're going to be having. So the objective here is to determine an optimum development plan for an offshore oil and gas development. And this is kind of a diagram of different things you could have here. You know, some sitting on this ledge where they're going to produce down below, all kinds of things. So don't need to go into all those. Like, I probably don't even know what they all are, to be very honest. But it's a nice picture I found. It talks about that there are different schemes and different alternatives I could use to develop the field. And so what I mentioned, after we do our brainstorming, we need to, well, I guess the brainstorming really here is these issues. And so these would be all the things that people brought up. And I remember one time I did one and I had like 200 things here of uncertainties. And then you can kind of consolidate them because some of them are somewhat related. But once again, it's important for them not to be, I like to do it independently rather than, you know, kind of going around the room. So they kind of, they think separately about it, because they may have different twists on different uncertainties or decisions.
Mm-hmm. So that's an important point. Sometimes in information gathering stage, it's important to separate the people, so there's no anchoring bias, there's no group thing, or there's less anchoring bias, there's less group thing.
That's right. Well, and this actually goes to the culture of the company. I don't want to talk about any specific companies, but Chevron's very open, and you know, they use the term test. Let me test that assumption, or test that statement. And basically it's saying, look, I don't necessarily agree with that. And but that's all very much acceptable. Whereas in other companies, that could be a no-no. You know, you don't do that, particularly if it's someone who's higher up in the chain than you are. Okay. So you take these issues and you break them into 3 different categories. Givens. These are things that you're going to, in the analysis, you're going to assume are givens. Now, I'll come back to that point. And then there are the focus on decisions. These are the things that the study is going to be working on. What's really important, you have to decide on that. So in this particular case, should we develop the project? What type of facility and what size the facility should be built? What's the capacity of the processing on the platform or wherever it might be?
Yeah.
And then there's going to be some decisions that are going to be tactical. We'll decide those later, the next phase of the project, okay?
Yeah. So this is very important. I mean, essentially what Brian is doing is going step by step through a very important decision quality process, which, as you will discover, already integrates risk management into it. So essentially, like if you were thinking about, well, how do I integrate risk management into decision making? Well, you just follow a decision quality framework, and then it automatically is including all the risk analysis inside. So step 1 is identify all the issues that need to be considered. Step 2 is group those into 3 buckets. One bucket is, this is a given, so we'll take it at face value. The second bucket is basically the hypothesis that you wanted to test. And then the third bucket is like the decisions of second order. So once we make the decisions on the main things, then we can think and decide on all the other priorities.
Well, one of the mistakes that often is made, though, Alex, is that uncertainties creep into here. Well, we need to focus on oil price over here. That's a focus decision. Well, no, it's not a decision. I don't get to decide the oil price. It's an uncertainty.
Yes.
So these have to be all decisions, things where the company, or maybe the joint venture, has to make a decision. And those are the ones that are represented by the squares, okay? Because all the other things, all the uncertainties like oil price and operating cost and deliverability of the resource and the size, so all of those things now are reflected as uncertainties when I get over to the influence diagram. Okay?
Yep. So step 3 is whatever we collected previously is represented in a graphical form, because it helps us switch from system 1 to system 2 thinking, and makes a lot of things that are uncertain a lot clearer. Absolutely.
Remember, we're trying to get clarity of action, get alignment of all the parties, whether that be you want the drilling department in an oil company to be aligned with the facilities folks and with the decision maker. I mean, you don't want the facilities folks to say, hey, I'm going to put the platform right here, right? And later on, you find out from the drilling folks, hey, I can't reach the reservoir. I can't reach this aspect of the reservoir from that location of the platform. So everyone has to be involved in this. And when doing that issue raising back here, I like to have all of the disciplines in the room together. So the drilling hears the issues that are raised by the facilities folks, and those folks, the finance folks or the tax people also hear about all that, because it could be important, and particularly in the oil industry, fiscal terms are very complex. It's not straightforward, except for the U.S. U.S. is relatively simple relative to a lot of other countries with production sharing contracts. Russia has a very complex taxing system as well, by the way. So we have our influence diagram here. And now we're going to take these focus on decisions, and we're going to put them into a strategy table. And this is where I really think the strategy table is the most important tool that's used within the decision quality toolbox. Because here are those 3 decisions that we said were focus on decisions, and then I talk about the alternatives. And invariably when you start putting together this table, you come up with additional decisions or decisions that need to be made because this becomes it was too high level at first. And so this can be expanded to have lots of different decisions. And what's happened, we started this in 1992 in Chevron, the computers have gotten a lot faster, which allows us to do much more complex analysis.
Mm-hmm.
And the executives are getting used to all that. And so for the executives to understand the strategy table and to approve it before you start doing a lot of the work is really important. Because the executive may have something in mind. He says, I know what I want to do, but you don't even have it listed as an alternative there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Value measures are really important. And so what are your value measures? And how might they change with decisions? And how do they impact your decision? We're gonna do a lot of that in the second and in the third section, by the way. But here are some examples. Does your firm look at rate of return or internal rate of return? Is it NPV driven? Make sure if you're going to do NPV, make sure you've identified the discount rate. Or maybe you're capital constrained. You focus on capital or ROCE.
Mm-hmm.
But I can also bring NPV and capital together into something called the profitability index. And we'll talk about that later, I think, rather than getting into the details of it now, but you can look that up on the internet, profitability index. Maybe the focus of this project is risk reduction or safety. You may be talking about the deliverability. It doesn't have to be deliverability of oil. It could be the deliverability of Amazon packages, Does Amazon want to have their own fleet of airplanes, okay? Should they be delivering it themselves or using FedEx or UPS or somebody else? They may have environmental damage you're worried about, or reliability. If you're the military, oftentimes you're worried about the reliability of your Air Force or something of that nature, things of that nature. So understanding your value measures is really important. And invariably, you're going to have to worry about the trade-offs. So now that we've done all this, we can bring it together into a conceptual decision tree. Now, this is a pretty straightforward decision tree, but what we've done here is we identified the different development scenarios, and then we talk about the different facility sizes. And you can have multiple decisions, and as we talked about earlier, not all the decisions have to be up front. Some could be later on if things are going to be resolved ahead of time. And in the case of the oil industry, the one uncertainty that's never resolved is price, because it's totally uncontrolled. And so this is the typical decision tree. So where is decision analysis applicable? It's applicable in almost every area. Every area. I mean, I can't think of a process where there's not a decision to be made. So that go, no go, operational decisions, typically routine, but you could have the same tree, the same model, and you plug in a little bit different numbers, and all of a sudden, okay, there's my answer. That's what it says I should be doing on this particular thing, because it's a little bit different from what we did last week or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
Machine capacities, queuing models, healthcare, testing products. Pharmaceuticals does a lot with decision analysis. Financial forecasts. I did a lot of analysis on my own retirement planning from Chevron, okay? And you could also use it for contract disputes. Should I be taking a certain position in a contract, and how might that work out with the other party? Do they sue me or not? And what's the likelihood of winning that? So all types of applications here are applicable to decision analysis.
Mm-hmm.
So what have we learned? How would you assess your decision quality? Once again, I would encourage you to think about these spokes and have your project team evaluate this. And independently, each one of them puts down 6 numbers, what the percentage is on each one, average those and look at it and see where you need to spend some more work. Maybe it's more on doable alternatives. Maybe you're not clear on the value measures that you have, okay, or the trade-offs, because there will be trade-offs, believe me. Okay, my production versus my net present value. So where do you go from here, Alex? So in the next presentation, it's going to build on this greenfield development. We're going to look at an Excel model. We're going to look at different value measures. We're going to optimize. I think it'll be a really great session. We're going to understand how the model incorporates the decisions and the uncertainties. This is going to be it's going to be somewhat of a monte-carlo. It's not going to be a technical decision tree model, but I'm going to be using software, a tool that's free, okay, from SIPMath. And then we'll talk about what's important using tornado diagrams. And then we're also importantly, and you mentioned it yourself, how to display the results in a way that management can understand.
Which is a very important aspect of decision analysis, risk analysis, is we can do all the calculations, but then how do we represent this in a way that is meaningful to the decision makers?
And that's a really good point, because you can spend, let's say you spent 2 months analyzing this thing, you fully, and this is one of the biggest complaints I have even of the analysts at Chevron, especially the younger ones. They spend all this time, they've been looking at these distribution functions, and they understand fully how to interpret them. But now they've got 15 minutes to 30 minutes to go and explain, okay, this is why we want to do this project, and this is a $500 million, $1 billion or more decision. And you've got to be able to tell a good story. You need to be able to explain it. And ideally, the graphs, in my mind, graphics should be kind of self-explanatory. And if there's breaks in this S-curve or whatever, you need to explain what they are. Why did that happen? Okay, so telling a good story is important, and it becomes actually more difficult because it's much easier to write a long story than it is to write a short story.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that kind of talks about the decision analysis. And,
let me summarize the whole thing, because in risk management and in decision making, we kind of talk about the same things. We talk about, we want our decisions to be risk-based. We want to integrate uncertainty into decision making. We want to make sure our decisions are made using all available information. And this is essentially how you do it. There is a methodology. It's called decision quality. It's based on decision science, which is more than 40 years old now, or approximately around that. None of this is groundbreaking. None of this is new. Some of the tools, decision trees have been around since 70s. Monte-Carlo has been around since 1946. Most of those techniques that have been combined into a methodological process have been around for a while. So we really have all the answers. And I hope this session encouraged those of you who are listening to us who are risk professionals. I hope it encourages them to investigate and study a little bit more about the decision science and the decision quality in particular, because it has all the answers how to integrate risk analysis into decision making. And for the decision makers who are listening to us, I really want to encourage you, for non-risk people, I really want to encourage you to start asking your risk people to help you with decision quality, to apply some of the tools that have been trialed and tested by large corporations globally over the last decades, and apply the methodology that has been scientifically shown to work better than our intuition, our gut feel, and all the traditional decision-making techniques that managers usually use.
Very good.
So thank you very much, Brian, and I'll see you in the next session.
Okay, bye-bye.